Welcome to this executive explainer on the Nitrosamine Compliance Challenge. I'm absolutely thrilled to guide you through this today. Now, if you're leading pharmaceutical quality or manufacturing, this is essential viewing for you. We're going to break down exactly how these sneaky impurities form, where your hidden vulnerabilities actually lie, and how to implement the mandatory mitigation strategies you need to know. So, let's just dive right in.
To really understand where we are today, we kind of have to rewind to a pretty pivotal moment. Let's go back to 2018. The entire pharmaceutical industry was shaken by massive global recalls of valsartan and other sartan medications. It was a huge wake-up call because it exposed this hidden safety threat deeply embedded in our supply chain. Suddenly, regulators and manufacturers alike realized that dangerous chemical impurities were slipping into finished products completely unnoticed. Here is our quick roadmap for today. We're covering 6 key areas: the contamination crisis, understanding NDMA, hidden manufacturing vulnerabilities, navigating regulatory limits, mandatory mitigation strategies, and finally, key lessons learned. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the contamination crisis.
So what exactly are we up against here? Our main culprit is NDMA. It's officially classified as a Class 2A probable human carcinogen. In plain everyday language, that means it's been shown to cause cancer in animals by damaging their DNA, making it highly likely to do the exact same thing to humans. And because of that potent risk, any exposure over a patient's lifetime has to be strictly, rigidly controlled.
Now, health authorities operate on a generally accepted risk level. They say a patient's lifetime exposure to these impurities should theoretically cause no more than 1 additional case of cancer per 100,000 people treated. Let me actually put that into perspective for you. The FDA estimated that if 8,000 people took contaminated valsartan at the absolute highest dose for 4 straight years, there would be just 1 additional case of cancer. But, because we're dealing with millions of patients worldwide, even that tiny theoretical fraction of a risk is completely unacceptable.
Moving right along to Section 2, understanding NDMA formation.
To stop this, we have to know how it happens. Nitrosamine formation requires a very specific 3-step recipe. It's kind of like a perfect storm. First, you need a susceptible amine, which is just a really common chemical building block. Then, you combine that with a nitrosating agent, like a nitrite. But here's the kicker. Even if those two mix, they usually need a third element, which is the right environmental conditions, to actually trigger the chemical reaction.
And what are those conditions? Well, these dangerous reactions absolutely thrive in acidic environments with low pH, high temperatures, and the presence of water. Sound familiar? Yeah. This happens constantly during standard processes like wet granulation, where you're binding powders together with liquids. Even time is a major factor here. These impurities can form super slowly over a product's entire shelf life. Because these parameters are literally everywhere in manufacturing, the risk is incredibly widespread.
Okay, let's get practical with Section 3, hidden manufacturing vulnerabilities.
When you're looking at your floor, risks basically fall into 2 buckets: direct and indirect. Direct risks are built right into your process. This is stuff like the deliberate chemical synthesis of an active ingredient. But indirect risks, those are the ones that totally blindside manufacturers. Imagine reusing recovered solvents to save a little money. If those solvents are poorly purified, they can easily carry trace nitrites from one batch to a completely different, supposedly safe product.
And get this, it isn't just your ingredients or your solvents. It can literally be your packaging. The EMA discovered this fascinating root cause, where nitrocellulose in blister pack lidding foil was actually reacting with amines in the printing ink. When the pack was heat-sealed on the line, the heat vaporized those chemicals, transferring nitrosamines directly onto the finished pills. I mean, wow. It really proves you have to look at the whole shebang.
Next up is Section 4, navigating regulatory acceptable limits.
Because these vulnerabilities are everywhere, the EMA uses a carcinogenic potency categorization approach, or CPCA, to enforce limits. For the most potent threats, the Category 1 stuff, intake is restricted to just 18 nanograms per day. 18 nanograms! That is a microscopic speck. On the safer end, Category 5 compounds are capped at 1,500 nanograms. Meanwhile, the FDA heavily scrutinizes any total quantity exceeding 26.5 nanograms based on a daily dose. We are literally talking about microscopic amounts triggering massive, costly regulatory actions.
So, why are they being this strict? Well, the intent behind these guidelines is not just to force you into doing random batch testing. No, regulators want to mandate a systemic, risk-based approach that is anchored directly into the DNA of your existing quality management systems. They expect you to anticipate the risk long before that drug ever reaches a patient's hands.
All right, let's talk solutions. Section 5, Mandatory Risk Mitigation Strategies.
Regulators across the globe require a very strict three-step framework. First, you've got to conduct a thorough risk assessment of your processes, basically evaluating all those vulnerabilities we just talked about. Second, if you flag any risk at all, you must perform confirmatory testing using highly sensitive analytical methods. And third, if nitrosamines are actually found, you absolutely must execute process changes to mitigate that root cause. No exceptions.
So, what does mitigation look like in practice? It means returning to first principles. You might need to optimize your route of synthesis or strictly limit recovered materials to the exact same process step. You also have to establish lab methods sensitive enough to hit a limit of quantitation, or LOQ, at or below 0.03 parts per million. And crucially, you've got to rigorously audit those hidden tiers of your third-party supply chain, even down to purifying your process water, because even that can carry hidden nitrites.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, Key Lessons Learned. Looking at the big picture, since the initial shock of those 2018 sartan recalls, this regulatory environment has completely transformed. In 2019, Europe launched a major lessons learned exercise. By 2020, the FDA issued comprehensive mitigation guidance. And in 2023, the EMA brought in the CPCA framework to handle all these complex, newly discovered nitrosamines. The main takeaway for us? Regulators have rapidly adapted. They've built a highly structured safety framework that demands your proactive, continuous oversight for all chemically synthesized medicines.
Ultimately, protecting your products, and more importantly your patients, begins with absolute visibility. You simply cannot mitigate a risk you cannot see. Which leaves you, as a pharmaceutical leader, to ask one final, absolutely critical question. Does your current supplier qualification program truly trace every single reagent, solvent, and packaging component back to its absolute origin? Really think about it. How deep does your supply chain oversight truly go? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I genuinely hope this empowers you to strengthen your quality systems starting today.